Cardfight Vanguard 0. Hate it or love it, but they brought some interesting game designs to the table. Let's go over some of them today.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, it's been a while that we did a non-card reveal discussion video. I believe the last one we did was way back at the beginning of the reboot when I talked about Waterfall. Today I thought, why not take a step back and take a more interesting look at some aspect of the game that we haven't talked about just yet. And the first thing that came to mind was the Grade 3 concept that was introduced in Cardfight Vanguard 0, the mobile game. If you don't know about the game itself, you are limited to a certain deck build, as you can see here on the screen. You can only have 1 grade 0, 13 grade 1s, 13 grade 2s and 13 grade 3s. And right there you might think, wait, what does it mean you only have 1 grade 0, then you only have your starter? Why are the triggers? Well, what they did in that game is that they changed the grade 3 units into trigger units. So they are your grade 3s, they have twin drive, they also have their powerful endgame abilities like we have now in standard and in premium. But they now also have the trigger icon and trigger ability printed onto the card. And that was something that really sparked my interest. What would happen if we bring that concept to regular Vanguard? Grade 3s with trigger units. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So right off the bat, let's go over what it really entices in its initial phase, and then let's go over the consequences and needed interactions that we can have when we bring this concept to regular Vanguard. So first off, the triggers that we are used to in standard are crit triggers, front triggers, heal triggers and draw triggers. And for those in premium, we also have stand triggers. And most of the triggers on themselves don't really have a great impact in the game. It's mostly the luck reliant, that it can swing a certain turn in your favor or not, especially in an Excel clan that relies on good offensive triggers or that your opponent is not getting the defensive triggers. But in most other matchups, it is not really that reliant on the cards themselves. But the problem is we are forced as players to run 16 triggers into our deck at all times. And that means that basically 16 cards in our deck are dead offensive cards. They are mostly luck reliant to even get their ability off. As seen as if we don't drive check them in any kind of way or we're not damage checking, there are just vanilla cards that only have high defensive value. Nothing else. You cannot really put them on the field to get some benefit out of them, and in standard they are vanilla. In some cases we don't mind, but I think if we were limited to those 16 cards that forced us to run those cards, I think a lot of players would either scrap a lot of triggers from the deck, or maybe drop the concept at all, as seen as we get 16 extra cards to run more combo pieces. Though in standard right now, I probably don't think we do that, as seen as we don't have a lot of good combo cards just yet. The card pool is a little bit limited. But when we get more cards, then that might probably change. But if we're going to look at the premium side, you would argue, alright, they have a lot more cards in their card pool, so they definitely want to have those 16 slots open for other stuff. But then you get into the issue that the triggers in premium got way power creeped, and in some clans you would rather run certain triggers over any type of card. For example, if you're running a Zodiac Time Beast build for Gear Chronicle, you probably always want to run the Hide-Nose Sheep stand trigger. Or if you're running Luard, you probably always want to run the Balal Al crit trigger, as seen as that thing is insane. And even with the premium triggers from, with the reboot triggers from 10k power, etc. and the extra shield, people are still putting Balal Al in their deck over a normal crit trigger, as seen as the Balal Al trigger value, because of its skill, is way higher than normal. So it's a little bit an issue there if it's going to make an impact or not. But what this opens up for us is that we have a lot more options to build our deck, a lot more playability, a lot more deck build diversity. And it seems as how they started the reboot, it looked like this is Bushiroad's intention. As seen as they turned a perfect guard and a draw trigger into one card. And that opened a lot of space for deck building. As seen as we're not forced to run 4 perfect guards in our normal slots. We can now put it into our trigger slots, which we are already forced off to run 60. Because a lot of decks in the end of G era, and it's most part always throughout the entirety of G era, every deck, Perfect Guards was a 4-off. Was basically the norm. So when you start building a deck, 16 slots are reserved for triggers, 1 slot for your starter, 4 slots for a Perfect Guard, probably some slot for your Stride Followers and your specific boss monster grade 3. And you can see that suddenly a 50 card deck is turned to maybe only 20 cards left to build your own thing around. And it seems with the reboot that they want to break that norm out. They want to do something different, to have more open deck building space. And this concept is probably very interesting and will work in their philosophy that it helps with adding more deck building, more open-minded way of playing Vanguard. And in the game itself, they stated that you can switch the trigger of the specific grade 3 whenever you want. I personally don't think that that is a smart thing to include, as seen as then everybody is probably going to put crits on everything. And I think certain grade 3s with their specific skills might be very overpowered if they got a specific trigger on them. So if you can just min-max any kind of trigger that you want on a grade 3, then it's going to be really, and it can be a really issue. Also, as seen as this, we are playing with physical cards and not digital cards, that can also be an issue with the secondary market. Because if, let's say, for example, Alfred, King of Knights Alfred, you can get a draw trigger version, a critical version, a front trigger version, etc. And you have an equal chance of drawing any of these types. Then if it comes to light that the best version of Alfred, King of Knights Alfred, is the crit one, because you want to run more crits, then it's most likely that every crit version of that card is going to spike insanely in their price. And every other card version with draw or heal or etc. is going to drop significantly. Also, the problem is that heal triggers are limited to 4. So what happens if you only start to pull heal trigger grade 3s? You cannot run them anymore. You are forced to drop them. I don't think they should do that. I think they should then print a grade 3 with a specific trigger on them. And that also opens up the space for some more game design, as they can make their skills compatible with their triggers, or not compatible, but that the power of the unit is so strong, but you turn it into a drop. Or, even better, you can turn them into a heal trigger. So they are forced to decide which overpowered card they want to run, as seen as they only can run 4 heal triggers in their deck. And that can make a very interesting concept of designing your grade 3s or designing your archetypes, as you can now limit certain cards because of the heal trigger limitation. And also because of certain triggers you don't want to run extra cards. You don't want to run an excessive amount of draw triggers. What also is a very neat little thing that I see happening if this is coming to Vanguard, is that I'm personally a fan of running multiple options. A lot of different cards, maybe 1-offs, 2-offs or certain things, to just have a lot of potential of going some insane wacky combos and interaction. I like to play decks that you see in the anime, where I see is running like 2 Alfreds of the Liberator, then the 1 Alfred Monarch, and 2 Gancelots, and 1 this, and to have all these combinations. Currently that's not viable and logical to do in Vanguard, as seen as most archetypes are specifically tailored to a certain grade 3 or only 2, and they don't really interact that well with each other, and you don't have really an incentive to run that many. But if they drop the trigger system and they make the grade 3s and triggers, then that can suddenly change. Because we sometimes want to run multiple different kinds of triggers, as some decks run 6 draws and 6 crits and 4 heals. And that means you're running a total of 5 different triggers, so you must run a total of 5 different grade 3s. And then suddenly we can have this wacky interaction of multiple grade 3 boss monsters that have their own skill, their own game plan, their own finisher, and you can go into them separately or multiple in one game in the right situation, if you draw them or not. And it makes a lot more diverse game plan than just one-dimensional, go into discard or kill them not, or you kill them or kill them not, then go into discard and then try to kill them. Or this is your backup after that misses or doesn't work, and etc. This way you can go into either discard or that card or discard, because we have multiple options. And that is something that I personally really like. I don't think a majority of the people share that incentive with me, but I personally would love that kind of gameplay, and that is also viable in tournament, as you can do that now. Of course, we have, especially in Premium, you have a lot of options you can do. You can build any kinds of thing you want, but everybody knows the moment that you start putting that many Great 3s in your deck, the deck is probably not going to work, it's inconsistent, and it's definitely not strong enough to make even a dent in the Premium format or in competitive play, so you're not going to see it, or you're not really going to play it. Well, with this concept of having Great 3s with triggers, then that potentially can be the new meta norm. And that's something that I personally really like, to see that we have a more diverse gameplay than really a diverse meta. As you can have a diverse meta with multiple decks being viable, but the problem is that every single matchups in most times are going to be very dull. They're going to be always going to end up the same way. If you're playing against an NOK deck for something, it's going to end with a loop. It's always going to end with a loop, because they only run that card. But if we have a more diverse Grade 3 boss monster pool because of the triggers, then you're not going to see always end with the NOK. They can end with the NOK loop. They can maybe end with a gigantic power card with that restrict any kind of guard value, or they can have a restanding Vanguard that has a great potential, or anything that from that sort. And that is something that I really would like to see in Vanguard, to have a more diverse game plan in a single deck, than have more diverse matchups in a tournament. Also, a thing to note that I briefly glossed over at the beginning of the video is we're opening up our deck space to have more deck building options. So we don't only have more Grade 3s that we're going to run, we're also going to run more Grade 1s, more Grade 2s, so we have a more diverse mid and early game. And also we need to now think about putting more guard value cards in our deck or more offensive cards in our deck, as most of the offensive cards and defensive cards are already set. We have 16 defensive cards that are our triggers, and then the rest are offensive cards. Those are Grade 1s, 2s and 3s. If they remove this trigger system and they add it on the Grade 3s, Grade 3s don't have defensive value. So initially we lose a lot of defensive cards from our deck. But then it's on to us to decide if we want to run more Grade 1s with higher defense. So if we're running a Protect deck, maybe we suddenly want to run the Grade 1 vanilla card with 15k shield, or the Grade 2 with extra shield. Or in Excel case, maybe now that we have extra space, we might want to run the offensive Grade 1 that has more attack value, so we can put more higher pressure early on more consistently. So this opens up a lot more deck building concept, a lot more things to think about than just going alright, this are my Grade 1s for the engine, this are my Grade 2s for the engine, and this is my Grade 3, and I have these 16 triggers. And they need to guard for me, otherwise I'm going to die. Now those triggers are gone, we suddenly need to think about, alright, what is our engine? How can I generate consistently good enough power? But how can I also generate enough shield value throughout the game that I can survive to go into my combo pieces, to go into my finishing combo? And then it suddenly becomes a more balanced way of building your deck. And we can also go either way. We can make a gigantic turtle deck with a lot of shield value, or we can go full on aggro with basically no shield value, but a lot of powerful cards. That's about everything that I want to talk about concerning this subject. I don't think we're ever going to get it in Vanguard, Grade 3 with triggers, but if we ever do, I'm personally very excited to accept such a different mechanic into the game. And I then hope that they simultaneously drop the trigger system that you need to run 16 triggers, and that the triggers are onto your Grade 3s, and you can decide how many Grade 3s with triggers or not you can run. Because that's also a thing. They can then also print Grade 3s without triggers. So we can decide if we want to run the non-Grade 3s with triggers. That can even be the more powerful cards. And you can limit some cards with the heal triggers clause on them. And you can put powerful cards with the draw trigger, so you give an incentive not to run it because it's a draw trigger. So all these concepts, together with the new deck building aspect to it, with all the new things you need to think about, the options that open up for gameplay, I think it can be an amazing addition to the game if it's done right. Because there are some loopholes and there are some things that can go very wrong if they do decide to do it in a certain way. A good example is that they're going to print every Grade 3 with every kind of trigger on them. I think that will ruin the secondary market for a lot of people. has seen. It's going to make a lot of spikes in certain specific combinations of grade 3 with triggers. But let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this topic of grade 3s with triggers, the whole shebang about deck building and new possibilities in as well standard as well as premium. Because they are two completely different formats, and as stated before, because of the triggers that are in premium, this might be a little bit different accepted than we're going to accept it in standard, as in standard the triggers are mostly vanillas. So I'm very curious of what you guys think about this concept, and if you would support it or not, if you would accept it in the game, if you are excited or not. I'm very curious of of your opinions, and maybe I missed something about this subject. Maybe I missed a consequence of this introduction of this mechanic in the game that can be positive or it can be negative. So let me know in the comments down below, and let's just get this discussion going. And as always, guys, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.